Welcome to Fun and Fundraising, everybody. The podcast where we talk with people behind top nonprofit galas and signature fundraising events to showcase how they positively transform their communities. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, and today I'm really excited to have Lisa Tynan on as a guest. Lisa is the events manager for Houston PetSet, and they host a wonderful event called the Fierce and Fabulous Soirée that kicks off the social season really in Houston each fall. And it's celebrating its 20th year this year, and it really has become one of those events that, you know, whenever you go, you see so many people you know, just because it's been such a broadly and wonderfully supported organization over the years. And we're fortunate to have Lisa's expertise as an events manager and, you know, having expertise working with Houston PetSet over the years. So with that, Lisa, welcome. And we're so excited to have you on as a guest today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to talk about Houston PetSet, about our soiree season, and about our 20th anniversary that we are celebrating this year.
That's a lot of good things going on, going on
Yeah.
all at once. But, before we dive into all that, talk a little bit about what the mission of the Houston PetSet is.
Well, our mission has pretty much been the same since the beginning, and that is to alleviate the homelessness and suffering of companion animals, and then to elevate their status in society. So those are two different parts to one goal, which is we want to, through our actions, through our fundraising, to end suffering. That's pretty simple. The more challenging side of things, I think, is elevating their status in society, because anyone who spends any amount of time in the nonprofit world knows that animal people love animals and they love to live, but when compared to other charitable causes, animal welfare is usually pretty far down the bottom in amount of money given every year. So, people who love it really support it, but it's hard to get it seen in the broader philanthropic community as a cause worthy of giving. So our goal is to bring awareness of the plight of animals in Houston, in Harris County, in Texas, in the country, in the world, and hope that our broader community can see that suffering and take it seriously and see that it is part of the community. Whether you have pets, whether you love animals or not, you are still affected by this crisis.
I'm glad you brought that up, and I'm glad that you brought, how it, what you do. Yes, you're Houston based and you support things in Harris County, but it goes far beyond that. And a lot of that has to go with just I'll just say the tireless, and that's not even an adequate enough word, devotion of the co-presidents, the founders of Houston PetSet, Tena and Tama. So talk a little bit, if you can, talk a little bit about For the Animals and their documentary and how that, really helps, broaden the mission of what they're trying to do more broadly.
There really aren't adjectives that work to describe how strongly they are committed to this cause. Tena and Tama have been doing this for, almost 20 years now. And they have been committed since the beginning to making this a solvable problem, and then being a beacon and really laying a blueprint for how other people can address this problem as well. We always say Houston is unique in how we are really just weighed down by the animal crisis here for various reasons, which would be a whole other podcast that we could go into about why we're suffering so greatly down here. But Tena and Tama have a lot of foresight, and they're looking ahead because they know that if and when, we'll say when, we can get a handle on this, we will have a really, really great groundwork laid, not just for other Texas cities, but for other cities all over the country and other cities all over the world. And so they started their own production company, and they put together this really emotional documentary. If anyone hasn't seen it, my number one warning is have a box of tissues on standby. I believe it's a 75-minute documentary about what Houston PetSet does, what Tena and Tama do specifically for the animals here in Houston. And it follows the plight of some specific dogs, street dogs and cats, and people who are working every day in the trenches to help them. But it sort of speaks to a broader crisis, which is, as I kind of already mentioned, animals aren't really viewed as necessarily valued members of our society, but they are an integral part of people's everyday lives. And so they really managed to cover quite nicely what the problems are, what some potential solutions are, and ways that people can get involved at the ground level all the way up to supporting things financially. And they premiered this all over the world. And in fact, recently just went back to London. They had a premiere in London and went back to London as a follow-up, essentially, with an art gallery program where they had photos of street animals, and it was well attended. And really, in London, they don't really have the problem that we have here. A lot of that is through legislation, just different cultural tendencies, I guess. And London saw For the Animals and said, how on earth can we help? So the fact that our friends across the pond, Houston and London have great business relationships, and lots of people work back and forth between the two cities. And they said, we want to help. And so they're fundraising, across the world from us over here. And they saw what we are trying to do, what Tina and Tama have been trying to do, and they were inspired to act. So that's really the goal, the mission of this movie, was to get people out from feeling sorry for themselves and feel empowered to go out and do something.
I'm really glad that you explained that so thoughtfully and the documentary, but there was something in there that I really want to touch upon, and that is, not only did someone from across the world see it and they wanted to help raise funds for this organization, but it was also across genres. Like, no one would necessarily think an art gallery is going to team with an animal welfare organization to raise money. And I think one of the things that really sticks organizations like PetSet apart from others is their willingness and openness and understanding that it takes a village, and it's not just a village of animals or people that support animals, but it's also people in the wider community and how they affect things, how working with animals and supporting animals affects the wider community at large. And that story really illustrated that in such a perfect way. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, it's so true. We can't look back at animal welfare over the last couple decades and say, well, clearly what we've been doing has worked, because we're still in this crisis. So the only way that we can move forward and accomplish anything is by thinking outside of the box. And if art galleries want to partner with us, we are more than happy to do non-traditional fundraising ideas, because then you reach an audience that you may never have reached before.
Absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But, I want to talk with you about how you initially got involved with this organization, your background that got you here. And, I'd love for you to share that.
Of course. I have a ridiculously all over the place, meandering sort of background. I originally thought I was going to be an actress, and I went to college to study theater, and that did not pan out in any way, shape, or form. So instead, I studied psychology. And I thought I was going to be a therapist, and I was all ready to do that and was accepted into a master's in social work program. And one semester in, I said, this is not I'm not feeling this. I'm a very millennial type person. I needed to vibe with what I was going to be doing. And I just wasn't vibing with it. But I was at Hunter College in New York City, and they happened to have an animal behavior program. And I thought, well, I really have always loved animals. I've always been around them and feel like it's a nice combination of something that I love and something that I'm interested in. And so I studied that and became an animal behaviorist. And the first part of my career was working with nonprofits on the animal behavior side, the ASPCA for a couple of years, then at the Houston SPCA for 6 years. And in the middle of that tenure at the SPCA, I had the opportunity came for me to move into a community outreach role. Which I really loved the idea of being out in the community and taking my experience and working with people who love animals and who have kids who love animals and are at events and fundraising. And it all kind of meshed together into a perfect job, really. For about 2.5 years, left and was in the for-profit sector working, but still in the animal world, working at a veterinary staffing startup. And I just missed nonprofit too much. I couldn't, I loved what I was doing, but I couldn't shake this feeling that I belonged in nonprofit. It just felt more natural for me. And as I was coming to this realization, there was a position available at Houston PetSet. It was marketing and special events. And I thought, well, I have experience in both of those things. And I knew about Houston PetSet, but sort of only on the periphery. I'd never worked directly with anybody there until I had a direct experience where I came upon an unhoused gentleman whose dog was suffering from heat stroke in the vestibule of a Target. And I stood there and I didn't know how I could help. And I Googled like someone who could help with vet costs, and Houston PetSet came up. And I called, and there was no hesitation. The person who unfortunately doesn't work with us anymore, but she was so helpful. And she said, I'm going to call you right back. She called me back and we coordinated, and I was able to get this gentleman help for his dog. And, that happened probably 2 or 3 months before I ended up applying for the job. And so I was like, this is the culture I want to be part of. I want to be someplace where we say yes, where we will do, as our team is only 6 people of full-time employees, and then Tina and Tama, who are full-time everything forever. But it's such a small group, but we work so closely together and so well together that we're able to just, we have a text thread constantly where we're like, did you get the call from this person? Can we call that vet clinic? Who can jump in and help? And we more often than not are able to say yes and to help people and to help their pets. And this is, for me, has really been the most exciting part of what I get to do, is helping pet owners. I've worked with the homeless animals for almost my entire career, and now I get to work with owned pets whose parents just need a little bit of help. And, you mentioned COVID. We still haven't recovered financially in the city, I think, from COVID. And so many people are struggling. And that's not a reason that you shouldn't be able to have a pet. And so if we can help keep a pet taken care of, good, physical health, keep their parents' mental health intact by providing that support, then it's mission accomplished as far as I'm concerned.
Well, thanks for that response and explaining that. And, I want to touch into something you were talking about your team of 6. And to me, the successful, what I'll call small but mighty teams, because that's essentially what you all
100%.
are, is it's passion. And every single person I have ever met involved with that organization is extremely passionate about it. So what advice would you give to an organization that has a small but mighty team in finding people that have a collective passion to really optimize your organization?
You can usually tell when you're sitting in an interview with somebody if it's, I want this job because this is the job I want, or I want this job because this is the job I'll take. And I think you want more of the former, because we don't, we all work from home. We have an office that we occasionally pop into if we need to, but we don't work 9 to 5. We don't get up from our desk and we don't leave and, turn off our phones. We're all, and it's probably, to an extreme. We probably should all sort of walk it back a little bit for our own self-care. But at the same time, we answer those texts and those phone calls and those emails because we want to help, because we care. And I think that in addition to somebody who is, you don't have to, you can work in animal welfare and not be a crazy animal person like we are. We have folks who have come in who have a pet, and that's really the extent of their experience in animal welfare. But that doesn't mean that they are not passionate and driven and care about the cause. So I think, just purely from a hiring standpoint, it isn't necessarily, have you worked in this industry before, or have you worked in this specific sector of nonprofit? It's more, why do you work in nonprofit? Do you, most people who work in nonprofit, we don't do it for the pay. That's not exactly a motivating factor for us, nor should it be. We want to feel fulfilled at the end of the day. And I think that will usually come across pretty well when you're trying to find a team member. And the other thing that I think is very, very important, and that I've worked in organizations and companies where this is not the case. You can't work with people who have a culture of that's not my job. We all have titles in our organization, but we do so much more than what our title says. And if you have even just one person on a team who's a that's not my job person, everything else falls apart, because there's too much to do and not enough hours in the day for people to be sitting out and letting somebody else take care of it when you could have stepped in and helped. And we are so fortunate to have a team right now. I think all of us at a moment's notice will stop, not just for, work things, but even in personal things. If someone can't get to where they need to be, they're having car trouble, we will go and pick each other up and drive each other places, because we care about each other and we know that we're all on the same team accomplishing the same mission.
That's incredible. And, you were kind of talking about your team, and actually a different word popped up for me, and that is the word ensemble. And really the reason I say that is a team is more, if you think of team in the traditional sense, you've got the pitcher, the quarterback, the linebacker, the center, whatever it is,
In their
and they've kind of
roles.
got their specific role.
Yes.
Whereas what you were talking about, you all really are an ensemble, because you can shift and you can take the lead, and sometimes you're on the front burner and sometimes you're on the back burner, and you know this with your background as a performer.
And love this. Yes.
There's just this beautiful dance with an ensemble. And that really, to me, that's probably the one thing that makes the small but mighty team soar. In addition to passion,
100%.
it's the understanding that you all have different roles. And I've seen that firsthand at events like the Fierce and Fabulous Soirée, which is what I know we're here to talk about today.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how this event has evolved over the last 20 years.
Well, I can only speak from personal experience. This will be my third soiree, but having access to all of our archives, I get to see what they looked like. And they really have turned from what was 20 years ago, a group of passionate people who wanted to raise some money that they could distribute to animal welfare groups around the area. It wasn't necessarily a casual affair, but it was on the smaller side. To now, we have usually around 500 guests, sometimes more. It's been at the Post Oak Hotel for the last several years, which is just an immaculate venue. There's no other way to describe it. It is pristine and stunning, and their staff is incredible. And it has, like you said, it kicks off the soiree season, and we do that on purpose. We want ours to be the biggest and the first one that everyone gets to experience, so that everyone else is going to have to work harder after us to try and match what we've put forward. And people, we have people who have been coming to the soiree for these past 20 years. And I think part of the challenge that we put for ourselves is, how can we make this bigger than last year? Size wise, I don't know how much bigger we can get. We would have to move to a football stadium if we wanted to ask more people to come, because there's only so many bodies that you can cram into one ante room for a cocktail hour. But bigger doesn't always have to just mean attendance. We want to keep raising more money than we've raised the year before. We want to surprise and delight our guests so that they don't know what they're going to expect, other than they're going to expect to have a good time. And that's our challenge. And that's why our soiree season never really stops. The event is in September. We have our follow-up event in November, where we take the funds donated during soiree and disseminate them to our grant recipients. I'd say we probably get December and maybe the first half of January where we're not thinking about soiree, and then it picks right back up again. And so it is a full year planning extravaganza. And that's because we are challenging ourselves to be creative and to do, of course, we will take ideas from what other groups have done that have succeeded, because we all go to these events and we know what we enjoyed, but we always want to have our special little Houston PetSet twist on it. And so that's really what drives us each year to make this event bigger.
Well, and I'm glad you're bringing all that up, because really, it's a year-round planning process for these events, and any successful event, that will be the case. And one thing that I like about PetSet, or I think is unique about it, is that there's always multiple chairs every year, but it's Tina and Tama are always co-chairs, kind of for continuity. And then you select a third, or sometimes a third and a fourth rotating co-chair. So talk a little bit about the selection process of how you select co-chairs for events each year.
Well, and this year for our 20th, this is actually, I don't know the last time they did it by themselves, but this year will just be Tina and Tama. And part of that is because this is such a special year, and they have been part of this for so long that it just makes sense for them to be co-chairing this event. But each year, the selection process is really, we look back and think about who has been involved and who has been committed and excited, and who do we think would love to get to take that next step, to feel involved on a deeper level. Because sometimes it takes that direct involvement with an event like this to really have your passion ignited for an organization. So we're looking back, but we're also looking forward, and who do we think could really be an incredible ambassador for our cause? I know I'm on a board for another nonprofit, and I know every soiree, every gala is organized a little bit differently, as who does the planning and who, are they committee in name only? Are they co-chair in name only? With Houston PetSet, if you are a co-chair, you got work to do. You are involved, and not to the point where it would be off-putting, but so that you get to take some sense of ownership and really feel like at the end of the night, you were a reason for the success. And so that does play a large role. Is we're never going to ask somebody to participate who just doesn't feel like they have the time or the bandwidth. We don't want it to be a chore. We don't want it to be an obligation. We would rather it be something inspiring and exciting to be part of. And from what I have seen, the selection process hasn't missed yet. We have had some really truly engaged and engaging co-chairs who make a real concerted effort to reach into their networks, people who may not have had animal welfare on their radar at all, and who, maybe they wouldn't buy a table or they wouldn't donate an auction item, but because this person specifically asked them, they say, okay, I'll do it this time. But then they come, and then that's our job to make sure that they become invested in the organization, just like we are, and just like our co-chairs are. So it's not overly complicated, but there is a little bit of thought that we have to put into it to make sure that we're setting everybody up for success.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. And one of the things you did bring up there was, each person, each co-chair or third co-chair or fourth co-chair has their own Rolodex. And with that brings their own followings. And one of the things that I have always been impressed with PetSet is every year when I get the photos, there is a mix of familiar faces and new faces. So there is clearly each year those people bring in people, and some of those people keep coming back again and again. So talk a little bit about how the Fierce and Fabulous Soirée has really built and maintained such a devoted following. Really, I don't want to say gradually, but each year it builds more momentum over the last 20 years.
I was thinking a lot about that, before coming to talk to you today, because I think a lot of what Houston PetSet does, and I will specifically commend Tena and Tama for this, is there is a creation of a personal relationship that then gets nurtured and maintained. So obviously, when you're hosting an event, whether it be of the size of ours or even smaller, you're getting people's contact information. That is not, of course, an excuse to spam them. But what it is an opportunity to do is to have touch points throughout the year, and thoughtful touch points. So, we're not going to, and, the more that we can learn about people, the more we can very specifically invite them to certain smaller kickoff events or send them notifications about certain campaigns that we're having, because we learn about them and we know what gets them excited and what might inspire them to give or to participate in some way. And those personal reach outs pay dividends. I mean, we're at the point now, we're still designing our invitation, but once those invitations start going out, we're almost already sold out of our corporate sponsorship, which it's May, and we just started offering it 2 months ago. So a lot of that has been through personal communications and personal connections. But when we start to reach our broader audience, we spend a lot of time. I'll take myself out of that. I am fortunate that I am not making these phone calls. It's Tina and Tama are calling their friends. They're sending text messages and say, hey, we want to make sure you know that this level of table that you got last year is starting to sell out, and we would love to have you back this year, and here's why. And I think if I were on the receiving end of that, I would be really flattered that not just the co-chairs, but the co-presidents of the organization have reached out to me and made sure that I feel wanted and invited. And I think those personal connections have have played a huge role, not just in bringing in new people, but maintaining those relationships across years and years of support. And we have some truly dedicated people who maybe started out as soiree guests who got inspired and felt like they were part of the cause and part of the solution, and felt inspired to continue that support well past that soiree party.
Well, that's really important. And, I'm glad that you're bringing this up, because one of the things is, and I can always tell an event that will have momentum over the years is that the people who purchase tables, whether they're companies or they're individuals, they themselves also have to put in some thought into who they're going to bring. And
Yes.
I think every nonprofit can relate to this, but there are certain table people that they will contact you the week of and say, I don't have anybody help me fill my table. So
Yes.
how do you all vet it so that you're not really having to do that, and you're picking people that are going to make sure that they're going to get the right people there, so that there's a mix of people that are having fun, with a mix of people who are going to give substantially, with a mix of people who are going to go after that auction item? How do you find those people to really kind of keep them engaged?
I think some of it goes back to relationships that have been built in the past. Once you come, if you're a person who does the whole season, the whole gala season, fundraising season, you know who of your friends is going to come and drink and who's going to come and participate. And you can kind of start to get the sense, I think, of which organizations they will be better at, if that makes any sense. There are
Absolutely.
some parties where it doesn't matter if you fill the table, then great, but other ones you maybe want to make a better impression, or that there will be something big that you can all bid on together. I think this year we're going to have a lot of people who are going to bring table guests who will bid. There are going to be some items, and I'm sure we will talk about those in a bit, where I doubt one person is going to be able to win that auction item. They're going to want to plan ahead, and they're going to want to pool resources, because they're pretty huge. And I wish that I had more than just these personal relationships, but I know that so many people who have come to our events before, they know who's going to enjoy it. And the nice thing is it's easy to get excited about something that benefits animals. Unless you're just simply a person who cannot abide them. It's pretty easy to get on board with saving puppies and kitties,
Yeah.
right? Like it's hard to argue against that. And I think another thing that we really do try to do is offer opportunities for people to get involved at every level, so that there's no obligation to only bring your highest bidding friends. There are also ways that they can help, whether they want to cover the cost of a vaccine clinic, or even just a vaccine or a spay and neuter. That's something that just about anybody can feel good about giving that money, even if it's, $50, $100. That's still, we tell you exactly what that money is going to go towards, and you can feel like you contributed. And if I'm filling a table, I don't have to worry about bringing somebody who may not be able to drop $10, $15, $20,000 in a night, because they'll still be able to get involved and feel like they are part of the evening. There's really nothing worse than showing up to an event, because I do it all the time, walking around being like, can't afford that, can't afford that, can't afford that. Well, this was a bummer. I'll just sit here and sip on my, complimentary champagne. We don't want that to be the experience for anybody.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad that you brought that up. And really, and you all know this from being a smaller and nimble organization, that there's human capital and there's financial capital. And
Yes.
you really need both of those in the room to feel successful. So you need those folks who maybe can only drop $50 or $100 to support, a spay or neuter, with the people that can, donate the 5 figures or even the 6 figures on an auction item. That's really kind of what creates the fun environment, because you're bringing the whole community in that regard. And it's more than just, people with a lot of means drinking a lot and
Exactly.
bidding a lot. That helps create that energy. And
Yes.
I gotta say, when I was there last year, I will say it is definitely one of the top 5 or 10 auctions in Texas, hands down, period.
Thank
I
you.
was dazzled by both, not just the live auction, but also the quality of the silent auction items you had. So talk about what the secret is to having successful live auctions and successful silent auctions? Because it's very difficult to do both. And you're an organization that can. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you. I think it comes down to relationships again. I mean, you have to be willing to hear no. Sometimes people won't want to make the big ask because they're afraid of the no. But if you don't make the big ask, you might miss out on an opportunity you would have had, or maybe they can't give you what you've asked for, but they can give you something a little bit less, which would still be fabulous. And I know there are quite a few organizations who are not allowed through their bylaws or through, whatever their governing body is, they can't use consignment either for live or for silent auction items. We are able to, and I do think that helps us quite a bit. You have to be willing to spend a little bit to be able to make and to raise more money.
So if I may, would
Yes.
you explain to those who may not be familiar with what consignment
Sure.
is, what that means exactly?
Yes, absolutely. It's what is essentially an auction item broker. There are people who their entire job is to acquire either experiences or tangible items that they pay a certain price for, and then they will offer that up as an auction item, and either you pay up front for it as an organization, or the consignment person takes a percentage of the total raised on that item. So we have some items that come in that we obtain ourselves through our board members, through our supporters, through asks. We definitely will go into stores that we know that our supporters frequent and say, would you be willing to donate a shopping experience or a gift card or a spa experience? And honestly, I personally don't know that we've ever been flatly told no. Like I said, they may not be able to offer us the thing that we were asking for, but there's always a gift certificate. There's always, bring your friends in at a discount, and even if groups are not able to use some kind of a consignment or an auction item broker, that doesn't mean that you don't know someone by several degrees of separation that can get you the ultimate experience. And I will say, just based on the people that come to our events, we've learned over the years what our guests are more likely to be drawn to. And we're not going to waste our time pursuing things just because they sound neat. If we think, we're looking through our mental Rolodex and thinking, I can't think of any of our friends who would really bid on that to the point that it would be worth it. Let's have them save their money on that thing and spend it on something bigger and better. So it is a very thoughtful process. And this year, we've made the decision, I think because we have some incredibly huge live auction items, that we are curating more closely our silent auction, so that there are really fabulous things, not repeats of a lot of different types of gift certificates or whatever the case may be, because we want people to really be thoughtful with how they spend their money. And the other thing is, we do a paddles up. Other organizations may call it other things, but this is just the straight giving, where anyone who's willing to give $5,000, raise your paddle. And for us, that is kind of the meat and potatoes of our event. And we want to make sure that they haven't blown their whole budget on something else that maybe we don't get as much money from. So that all of that kind of weighs into how we're going to decide. I will also give a huge shout out to, we have a women's committee. That's just a group of wonderful philanthropic and involved women who wanted to support Houston PetSet. And one of the ways they are doing that is by being our auction committee, our silent auction committee. And they are absolutely crushing it. They have basically procured almost everything that we are going to need this early in the game. So now we get to spend the next several months marketing and creating a beautiful experience so that when people show up, they know exactly what their money will go towards. And they can be excited walking in the door, already knowing, I want to bid on this, I want to win this. And truly, we keep talking about our small but mighty ensemble. Without a group of people helping us on this specific thing, we would just be absolutely spinning our wheels. So a massive thank you to our women's committee, because they are blowing this out of the water, and we're so excited to have them.
Well, one thing I want to mention, in addition that the women's committee sounds amazing, but the one thing that you mentioned earlier on is you may not get the thing, but you may get a thing. And especially if
Mhm.
the a thing is from a place and a place, quote unquote.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that's what I was so impressed by your silent auction last year was you had a level packages with a thing from a places bundled together around a certain
Yes.
theme. And that really when it's like, oh my gosh, so I can really stretch this out all year. I can make a weekend out of it. I can do treat myself once a month, whatever it is.
Yes.
You've created that space from a thing from A-list places that I think is just really cool. And that's really one thing I wanted to highlight that I think you all do really, really successfully is that.
Thank you. Yes. And that again goes back to that relationship building. We are fortunate in that Tina and Tama live and operate in that world, and they can walk into these stunning places and these hard to get reservations restaurants, and they know the people there. Or even members of our board have that same kind of social capital, and they can walk in and say, this is something that is important to me. And these amazing businesses all over the city and sometimes outside of the city say, sure, how can we help? It really does. It all comes down to fostering good relationships.
Absolutely. And, speaking of good relationships, you this year at the event, you're going to be honoring 20 Fierce and Fabulous honorees. So
Yes.
talk about that selection process because there have been, I mean, I'm always blown away by the names that are there each year. So how did you all curate it down to 20? I want to understand about this selection process a little bit.
I will be honest, it has not been easy. We have, I know sometimes it's hard for people to think of even one person that they feel like honoring. We've had to whittle down to 20. And that's saying something. And this is, we didn't want to just make it somebody who has a big name necessarily or who's donated the most money. We really wanted this to run the gamut of people who have supported Houston PetSet specifically or supported Houston animal welfare as a whole. And like I said, we had to whittle it down. And there were some sleepless nights amongst us trying to figure out how are we going to pick 20. Should we do this again next year? I mean, it's how can we honor all the people we feel need to be honored? So I should say there are so many people beyond these 20 who are so deserving. And we just had to kind of make sure we had a nice, even distribution of financial supporters, donors who have been, supporting us throughout the years. We wanted to absolutely honor some of our direct partners. We didn't talk a ton about our programs and our services, but our basically our founding purpose at Houston PetSet was to grant to organizations who are doing the work in the trenches. So of course we had to make sure we were honoring people in the trenches doing the work, but we wanted to make sure the groups that we were highlighting of the several hundred that we support are groups that have had a broad impact, not just with us, but in the community. Some of them have been around longer than we have. So we also wanted to honor our veterinarians, some of our law enforcement partners that we work with. Of course, we would be remiss if we didn't honor some of our longtime, really, truly dedicated donors, because without them, Houston PetSet doesn't exist. But this was important to us this year to say, this isn't just about the money. This is about, like you said, the people capital. This is about the man hours, the woman hours that have been put into making the lives of animals better. And fortunately, we had so many people to choose from, and we really wanted to make sure that it was we didn't make anyone feel left out, but we wanted to make people feel special and thank them for what they have done. Animal welfare is not for the faint of heart. And it takes a special type of person to commit to it and stick through it despite the heartbreak. And so many people get involved directly or financially or, through advocacy. And however they choose to get involved, if they have stuck with it and they have made things better for the animals of Houston, then we are proud to honor them and to read their names and to share their videos and hope that the world is as grateful as we are.
So you mentioned the word special quite a few times in there because it takes a special person, it's a special cause, and you've got a special milestone coming up on the 20th anniversary. So talk a little bit about some things you're going to do to highlight that milestone at this year's Fierce and Fabulous Soirée.
Well, what we've already started doing in the run-up is we're releasing our little video vignettes of our honorees. The night of, we very, very much want to keep our program tight. Nobody wants to sit and listen to us yammer on for 2 hours. They want to socialize with their friends and they want to win auction items. So we wanted to make sure that each person that we're honoring gets to be in the spotlight. And so we have our incredible videographer, who I have to give him a shout out. Everyone should hire him, except don't hire him because then we won't have enough time for us. But his name is Makayo Parrott, and he is, I oversee this video project, and it's like turnkey. I just said, can you do this? And he runs off and he does it. And he's just an absolute blessing. And he gets our mission, and he understands how to get people to talk about it in a way that is compelling. And the videos I've just been so pleased with. So that's one thing that we're doing special this year that we haven't done before. There aren't even enough words to talk about how excited we are about the big, keynote moment of this is we've turned our soiree into a concert. So this year we are beyond excited to welcome the Texas country legend, Pat Green. He is effectively the father of Texas country. And he is, beloved across not just Houston, but he is here all the time. If anyone has ever seen him perform at the Rustic, I believe he's part owner of it, and he is here all the time. And his team has been so phenomenal to work with. It is really a pleasure. We say, would he be willing to shoot a video for us? And they said, no problem. He shot a promo video for us. Will he be willing to do interviews? No problem. So they are making it easy for us to build hype around this event. And I will say, I'm not a native Texan, but I have been here for, what year are we in? So for 12 years now. And I only heard about Pat Green when I moved to Texas. He may not be known outside of Texas very well, but here people know him and people love him. And when we tell people, oh yeah, well, we have Pat Green, he's not just doing a song, he's doing a concert. Like, I think 30, 45 minutes maybe set, like a full concert that he's doing for us. In addition to that, he has agreed to do a meet and greet beforehand for people who purchase our special VIP ticket. And afterwards, he's doing a private VVIP acoustic set in a private room after the show. He could not be more generous with his time. So we are so grateful for that. Now, I hinted at our auction items and being very excited about one in particular. Well, two, really. He has been so gracious that he is giving us 2 live auction items. One of them is a signed guitar, which for our collectors out there, that is a centerpiece of a music collection. And he's auctioning off a private concert. We already have people coming to the soiree to win the private concert. So they have purchased their tables because they're hell-bent on being the winner of that private concert. This is a concert for you and 50 to 100 of your closest friends in your home, in a concert venue, whatever. I am giddy at the thought of how rowdy the auction is going to get when they start auctioning that off, because people are already fighting over it and it's May. So this is going to be, you talked about how dynamic our auctions are. And part of that is because we have such a fun and rowdy group of guests who come every year and who get excited and who have set aside for this night so that they can participate in this event. And I just have a feeling it's going to go off the rails in the best possible way. And to finish that and go right into a concert, people are just going to be beside themselves. And I will encourage everybody to Uber, because we imagine that the alcohol is going to be free flowing and that people are going to be line dancing, and it's just going to be too much fun. We're just, we need all the time we can get to plan it, but we're also kind of excited about the day to be here.
And it is a party, and I will tell you this from experience last year. I'll full disclosure on this. So I had actually reached out to Tina and Tama, to be like, well, what time are you all going to arrive? And they're like, yeah, we'll be there at 6:30, 6:45. I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to beat them there. I'm just going to get there right at 7 o'clock when it starts. And I walked in and it was packed at
Full.
starting time. I was like, wait a minute. I was
Yep.
like, I was like, wait, how did these people sneak cocktails for 45? They had to have been there 45 minutes by the time we got there. It was just like,
Yes.
wow, this is a dazzling event that people are that excited to go that everyone's not on time. They're early.
They're early. And that's one of the reasons we have to be so thoughtful about our scheduling is that, anyone who's ever been to an event at the Post Oak, the pre-function area is big, but it's not 500 people big. Without it getting a little bit cramped. So we have to be very, very careful about how we organize things because everybody shows up for the cocktail hour and they're all there at the beginning. I think part of that is they want to be there for those silent auction items and to get a good look at things. But they're just ready to party. And it makes me so happy that people are so excited to be there that there's a term fashionably late. There isn't a term fashionably early because it's not a thing apparently except at our event where everybody shows up early, beautifully fashionable and ready to party.
And that's the hallmark of I mean, when people are like beating down the door, let me into your gala, you're definitely doing something right. And I know we're coming up on time today, but I think this leads into the perfect final question for you. And that is, what is one thing all successful galas and signature fundraising events have in common?
I think in my experience being on the planning side and being on the guest side, I think what makes a successful gala, obviously food is important, decor is important, having a great program is important, but I think the groups that really stand out for me are the groups who are best able to tell their story in such a way that looks back but also is inspiring and moves the cause forward. I've been to enough of these events where I've sat through, and I will never name names, but really almost snooze fests of programs because they couldn't find that one entry point into people's hearts and into people's motivation to give. And the groups that really, you can have all the flashy things and you can have all of the fun items to buy and all the, fancy drinks that are on theme. But if the people who attend don't feel connected to the mission, there's only so much that they're going to be able to give, and they may not come back. And one thing that I have been really proud of with Houston PetSet is we walk a really, I think, fine line between showing people there is a crisis, there is a problem. It's the type of crisis and problem that makes people cry, but we don't want to spend the night crying. We want people to acknowledge it, to recognize it, and then feel inspired by the work that we are doing and the motivation that we have to get people on board with us so that they throw their paddle up in the air because they're like, I can get behind this because there's hope. And I cannot stress enough that you have to look forward in order to get people to come along with you. Because if you're always turned around and facing backwards and looking back on things, they'll turn around and look backwards with you. And then you've lost all of your momentum. And I am grateful that we have the type of really motivated and inspired and inspiring supporters that fall in line right behind us and say, all right, what do we do next? And that, I think, has led to Houston PetSet's success over the last 20 years. And I think is a really important box to check for anyone who's planning an event of their own. Have we engaged our donors in a way that inspires them the day after the soiree and the day after that and the week and the month and the year following?
Well, in the words of Pat Green, that's a mic drop moment if I've ever heard one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time today. This was really a wonderful conversation. You gave us so many wonderful insights on so many different things. And, we can't be happier for you and to the 20th annual Houston PetSet and the next 20 to come. So thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you for all you do to support nonprofits and help us do the hard work every day and make this world a better place.
My pleasure. And the 20th annual Houston PetSet's Fierce and Fabulous Soirée will be held on September 6, 2024 at the Post Oak Hotel in Houston, Texas. For more information, please visit houstonpetset.org. And that will do it for this episode of Fun and Fundraising. I'm your host, Rob Giardinelli, reminding you to keep it fun, keep it interesting, and your guests will have a great time. Have a great day, everyone, and take care.